Welcome to Ask Cadence, everybody, the project management podcast. My name is Pete Wright, and I'm sitting here around the table with Scott Lissit. Hello, Scott.
Pete, good to see you again.
It's been a very long time, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
Sure.
And John Patton. Hello, John. Hasn't
Hello,
been
Pete.
so long.
Hasn't been so long. Always glad to talk to you.
Good to see you. I think we have a really interesting topic today that we're going to kick off. I think it's interesting for a number of reasons. First, it's interesting because we're bringing up a project management or a field of human behavior study in the context of project management, discussing behavioral models and the importance of them that has been, it's been around for a while. And yet there is, we have a sort of a new take on why these things are important and why understanding behavioral models in project management is important. And so we thought we would share a little bit of our thoughts around the table with our gracious audience today. So Scott, I think, can you kick us off and let us know why are we talking about these things?
Sure, Pete. And the reason why this is important for projects is because from a project perspective, oftentimes it's the interpersonal interplay between team members, between project manager and other stakeholders, between just about anybody on the project, that can sometimes make or break the project. It's not just the technical aspects that are important. We're always working with other people, and it's such a critical factor in understanding project success.
Because you can have all the art and science of project management down to a T. If your people aren't working well together, it's
Absolutely.
does no good.
Absolutely. You can have the world's greatest schedule, but as you said, if people cannot coordinate effectively with each other, then they're going to have trouble. So we have looked at this from three different angles. We've looked at it from the individual one-to-one relationships. We've looked at teams or groups, and we've looked at it from cultural perspectives, because in this global environment that we're in today, a lot of projects find that they're working with teams from different countries. So first of all, awareness that there are individual or group types or patterns or cultural patterns. And so first of all, awareness, and then we're going to talk about some specific tools and models that we can use to try to assess behavior in all three of these areas.
And Scott, in our research, for applications here, we've realized that at the individual level, we're talking about work behavioral models. So we try to stay away from general psychology, in abnormal psychology. So work behavioral models and work behavioral motivation sorts of models. We restricted it to those two areas.
Good.
So how do you start? I mean, so we're going to narrow it down. We're going to start with the individual models we're talking about. We're not just talking about, how team members work together, but how interpersonal relationships function on a project, whether between team members and sponsors and project managers. How do you start?
Well, we're also talking about being able to understand what are some of the types or preferences of the people who are involved on the project team. So if a project manager is aware of some of these factors, they can then give somebody on the team an assignment or a task which would be better suited for their own type. So that's also added to the mix as well. And one popular tool, which has been around for a while, but I think is in a lot of different business settings now, is the Myers-Briggs, or the MBTI as it's called, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. And in this tool, there are 16 different combinations of, or 16 different types. And they define somebody's preference for how they behave. And there are 4 different letters that are used. So if you've ever been in a meeting and somebody says, hey, do you know that Joe is an ENTJ? You may not know what they're talking about, but that's how people who use Myers-Briggs speak.
They speak in code.
Yes, they do. And so there are 4 letters in the code. And the first letter is either E or I. That signals either extroverted behavior or introverted behavior. The second code is N or S, and that stands for intuitive or sensing. Intuitive is more of a thoughtful approach, whereas sensing is more of a concrete physical senses. We all have 5 senses, and John, please add.
Yeah, Scott, I've heard that the eyes are people that are very good at describing where the rubber meets the sky.
You mean the ends, I think.
The ends. Sorry. Yeah.
Is it ends or eyes? I don't know.
It's ends. It's ends.
Yeah.
N and S.
Yeah.
So intuitive people are very broad thinkers,
and they like to look at the big picture, talk about strategies.
I resemble that remark.
And sensing people are more into the physical aspect
into
of
structure, that kind of stuff.
Right. And I should say that most people are somewhere in the continuum. So it's not either one or the other. But most people have elements of both, but they have a preference where they find themselves working in one side more than the other. The third letter is T or F, thinking or feeling. And so this is about being more comfortable in the world of thoughts or mental processes versus more comfortable in the world of feeling. And how does that show itself? And so a classic way of distinguishing thinking and feeling is if somebody says, well, we really should think hard about this new policy because it could really impact everybody in the group in a very hard way. So that would be an example of a more feeling kind of behavior. And the last letter is a J or a P, which is judging or perceiving. And judging is assigning value to things that we see. So a chair isn't just a chair, but it might be too small, it might be too big, it might be too uncomfortable. So I'm judging this chair, whereas a perceiver type more may be comfortable saying, well, this is a chair.
Okay.
So there are layer upon layer of complexity here, which we don't need to get into, but it is very simple to give people multiple choice tests to assess where they are on this, and then for project managers or functional managers to then take this into account on teams.
And that really is I think the germane question of all of this. Why, where does the rubber meet the sky in terms of using these different behavior models in the context of day-to-day management of a project?
I'll take that on, Pete. It really is to enable team members and projects to understand themselves and others better in a work environment. So we've taken everybody through the project plan. They've kind of gelled as a team, but still, if we have no knowledge of work behaviors of other people, we tend to be intolerant. And so afterwards, it's just a really nice way to set the team appreciating each other by taking them through a work behavioral profile. And in doing this, we always say, well, it's confidential, and if you decide to share your profile, it's voluntary. And people are sort of covering their hands up as they're answering and taking the test or instrument, and then they start showing people their results and talking about themselves in the context of their profile.
I don't want to derail us too much because I know we want to talk about some other models that are appropriate in the context of project management. But I do want to ask you guys this: what are the potential risks in using a model like this? What do the critics say about why you may want to be wary or potentially not use these types of models in the project management context?
Well, one is called typecasting. So a person says, I'm an ENTJ, I'm going to be dominant and opinionated, and I'm not going to change. Okay, so really what this does is it enables a person to see what their strengths and weaknesses are, and their strengths come naturally, and they can work on pulling up their weak areas consciously. And that a person can only handle one kind of activity on a job. That's all called typecasting. And so we do this for the purposes of understanding.
And there's also a risk of labeling people. So once somebody gets labeled as an introvert, let's say, now we're just going to give them assignments where they can shut their door or sit at their desk all day long and never talk with anybody during the day.
And that's might, the Minority Report response, right?
So we really want to emphasize there is no bad profile. And particularly for the judgers that Scott talked about, we're interested in perception and not assigning some kind of value judgment to the chair, to the person.
Absolutely. There is no right and wrong.
Right.
And we all have qualities of all types. So what we're trying to do is, for example, in the extrovert versus the introvert model, one of the qualities of an extrovert is that they tend to think as they speak. So they will speak in order to think something through, whereas the introvert will think it through first and then say it.
That's the ready, aim, fire versus ready, fire, aim.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And so if we know that Sally is an extrovert on the team, we know that she's probably going to talk during the team meetings as she's thinking something through.
From what you're saying, strategically, as a project manager, if you're aware and have had these discussions with your team members, then and you have an awareness that every element on the Myers-Briggs indicator or any of these is full of gray area, you end up using these more strategically. Would that be fair to say?
Very much so, Pete.
I know that this task might challenge Sally, but I also know that she's very thoughtful and will be able to get through it if we're not on a deadline.
In application, Pete, I really wouldn't want people, treating this like astrology and beginning, overthought, over calculation and assigning tasks. Tasks get assigned to people who have the expertise to do the work, not based on their personality or work behavioral profile. This is not a requirement to give the instrument to the team and have them feel it out. However, the experienced practitioner learns to read people and learns to talk in language which is more receptive. That person will be more receptive to.
And this is just one factor that any manager will look at,
Right.
along with everything else: job performance, expertise, years of experience, so on.
Are there other models we should bring up before we break?
Yeah, sure. Let me identify you. Let's go back 400 BC to Hippocrates. Hippocrates came up with the four humors, which later on in the Middle Ages became the four types of people: sanguine, melancholy, choleric, and phlegmatic, or peaceful type person. Also, with four sort of categories is something called DISC, which stands for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness, or cautiousness. And then there's something called strengths development inventory. And that has about 7. And it's known for colors. Blue, which is people are interested in the feelings of others. Red, which is assertive, strong, dominant. Green, which is more analytical. And a hub, which is flexible to these 3 types. And they're the in-between types. So you get a total of 7 there. And then the one which is, in my opinion, the most complex, the Belbin work behavioral profile, which has 3 kinds of people in the action orientation: the shaper, the implementer, and the finisher. 3 types of people in the people-oriented ones: the coordinator, team worker, and investigator. And then the thinkers, which are the plant, the monitor, and the specialist. And in all of these profiles, Pete, Scott, you see some thought around dominance, thought around verbalization, thought about people who get work done, and people who like to contemplate and think before they act because they're interested in precision. Somewhere in all of these, you're going to see these orientations.
Yeah.
And
So-
each have people with preferences for using them around the world.
Well, speaking of preferences around the world, in your experience, is there one of these instruments that is better suited for project management than another that you would recommend, or do they all have their place?
Even inside Cadence, Pete, we all have our favorites. My favorite used to be DISC, and then it kind of migrated to Myers-Briggs. And most recently, I found that SDI, the Strengths Deployment Inventory, has been powerful because it addresses not only the individual but the group level of behavior.
And there's yet another category too, which we haven't talked about, which is leadership assessment instruments too. What I've seen management use some of these instruments in choosing project managers or assigning project managers to very important projects.
This is a fascinating discussion. I think we've just hit sort of the tip of the iceberg. So let's pick this up again and go to our next the next big category next week. In the meantime, thank you both very much for at least launching this discussion and taking your time today. On behalf of Scott Lissit and John Patton, my name is Pete Wright. Thank you all for downloading and listening, and we will catch up with you again on Ask Cadence.